Alice and I are always looking to be more healthy, and we were just talking about how fasting is one of the best ways to do that, but it's so hard. But the great thing about Prolon is that's not what you're doing. It's not that you're not eating for 5 days. Instead, you're using their science-backed program to convince your body you're fasting.
You guys, this 5-day program really is amazing. It comes beautifully packaged and it does all the thinking for you. Each day is its own box. And by following their program, I know I just feel so much better. And I can't wait to experience Prolon Next Gen and continue to see results. For a limited time, you can be first in line to experience the new Next Gen at special savings. Prolon is offering the Prosecutors listeners 15% off site-wide plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe to their 5-day program. Just visit prolonlife.com/prosecutors. That's PROLONLIFE.com/prosecutors to claim your 15% discount and your bonus gift. prolonlife.com/prosecutors.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on the Prosecutors, we return to the Dyatlov Pass and look at theories about what may have happened to the hikers there. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, with my beauty-loving co-host, Alice.
Oh, Brett, do you know what that's in reference to?
Nope.
So, that's
that
awesome.
That was shared by our friend Christina, so shout out to Christina.
Christina, oh, she knows me. So that is a reference to Anne of Green Gables, Anne with an E. It's the first time she sees Green Gables. It says, Anne's beauty-loving eyes lingered on it all, taking everything greedily in. She had looked on so many unlovely places in her life, but this was as lovely as anything she had ever dreamed. It's just so lyrical and beautiful. Thanks, Christina. Sorry, Brett, you had nothing to do with it. But...
Thank you, Christina. I had nothing to do with it. And I'll note it was beauty-loving, not beautiful, because people don't want me to comment on your attractiveness, which I understand.
Has someone said that?
We're all about your mind here on the Prosecutors. They did. People often praise our descriptors for not focusing on your looks, even though there is a Reddit thread currently about that very issue. No comments on me, just you.
Can we also say that thank you, Redditors, for being interested in it. But the reason there's a Reddit thread is everyone apparently thought I was very ugly. So I'm not sure how much of a compliment that is.
I took that away from the thread as well. But that was their impression of you. So I guess you have an ugly voice. I don't know.
Apparently. Ugly voice set the bar low.
Whatever. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So
in the beholder's ears, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, we have literally been talking for 45 minutes before starting to record today.
Yeah. And this is our second time recording this episode. We recorded this episode once, but we had a catastrophic failure on our technology. So you guys, we had a dress rehearsal. So this is going to be even better. This is going to be the best Dyatlov Pass episode ever.
Really, we just took Russian lessons between last time and this time so we could better pronounce words.
Right. I mean, I'm not making any promises, but that's exactly right. A couple things I do want to say before we get started. Number one, thank you to all of you. We passed 1,000 ratings on Apple. We actually have passed 1,100 ratings on Apple, and that's all thanks to you. Thank you so much. Thanks to all of you who took the time to leave a rating. I hope if you haven't left one, you'll join the party and leave a 5-star review on Apple. Or, thank you to all you 1-star people. You got us there. Haha. You ended up helping us out in the end. So whatever review you want to leave, we're really about the numbers here, not the actual rating. So the more, the better. So the second thing we have today, it's in addition to all those Apple reviews you guys have been leaving, this big news for us. So everybody get ready. Drum roll. We have sponsors.
Yay, Brett! The day has finally come.
The day has finally come. So all those annoying ads you guys have been listening to for the last couple of months, we are getting rid of those, and we are going to start having sponsors on this show. And we want to welcome our first 2 sponsors, and I hope you guys will welcome them, BetterHelp and Daily Harvest. We're going to be talking about them later on in the show and telling you guys how you can get some discounts if you want to sign up. Support these people, BetterHelp and Daily Harvest. It supports us if you support them. And given that these are our first sponsors, if we do a good job, who knows what might happen. So I hope you guys will support them and support us. And lastly, I just want to, if they're listening, and I know the captain doesn't listen because I made fun of Ohio State that time and it upset him, but thank you to the captain at True Crime Garage and Maggie Freeling. Alice and I had and I kid you not, a 5-hour get vocal with the captain and Maggie last week. It was
epic. It was one for the ages.
Epic does not describe it.
It was one for the ages. I lost my voice the next morning, and I didn't even talk nearly as much as I could have, I suppose.
Yeah, and so if you're interested in spending 5 hours of your life, actually we broke Get Vocal, only I think the first 4 hours recorded. So, but if you're interested in listening to that, go over and join Maggie Freeling's Patreon page and support the work she's doing and listen to us ramble for 4 hours about true crime. Basically every true crime case ever. It was amazing.
It was so much fun. We had a great time.
It was so much fun. And we'll be doing a Patreon Get Vocal soon. If you're interested in being a part of that, head on over to our Patreon page and you'll get ad-free episodes of our show and you'll get to talk to us about anything that is on your mind. But having said all that, I think it's time to get back into this case. You guys, we've had amazing response to Dyatlov Pass so far. At this point, the first episode's out. The second episode's actually coming out in a couple days. Really been surprised by how many people did not know this story, and been fun watching you guys dive down the rabbit hole, and we appreciate you going down those rabbit holes with us up to this point. But today we're getting down to brass tacks. Today we're going to start talking about theories. We're probably not going to get through them all today. This is going to be one of those weeks where we have 2 episodes. Going to have another episode tomorrow finishing this up. Assuming we don't get through them today, which based on our previous recording,
we're not going to, Brett. Let's be honest. Let's just say now, and let's also put it out there that we're going to say some really controversial things about the theories. So, saddle up. Get ready to write us angry emails. I had some epic rants you guys are missing out on. I'm feeling much more responsible and level-headed tonight. So sorry, guys. You're going to miss out. Okay, so we want to take you all the way back to where we started in this case, which is the avalanche theory. Those of you guys who've talked about this case, and we've been following your discussions online, including on The Gallery, which is a recently created Facebook discussion page about the Prosecutors Podcast, which was amazing. Just another one of those things that people do that kind of blows my mind, but been following your discussions, and there are a lot of you who I think gravitate naturally to the avalanche theory, and I think part of that is because, Alice has said it many times, we're the cold water prosecutors. We pour cold water on theories. We tend to go with the theory that seems like it's the most logical theory, the one that fits the evidence best. And I think our fans are people who do the same. And so I think a lot of you gravitate towards the avalanche theory because it seems like it's the least sexy theory. It's the theory that you put aside all the crazy and you just look at the facts and maybe you say to yourself, avalanche seems most likely. But is it? People say that this is the Occam's razor theory. But is it the Occam's razor theory? Remember, Occam's razor, it doesn't just mean the simplest answer wins. That's sort of the dumbed down version of it that people sometimes say. The Occam's razor really is about
the facts on the ground as much as anything. It's about taking the facts that you have and the evidence you have and applying the simplest theory that will explain those factors. So, you got something like the JFK assassination. You can explain that assassination with Lee Harvey Oswald. You don't need a second gunman. That's probably the most controversial thing we'll say today. But you don't need a second gunman. Lee Harvey Oswald is enough. And so Occam's razor will tell you that means Lee Harvey Oswald was probably responsible. Is that the case here? Is this a case where the quote-unquote simplest answer is the best answer? And I'm really curious to know what you think about that. We've looked at all the evidence. What do you think? Was it an avalanche?
And Brett, let's stop there real quick, because before we even dove into the case, when we said we were going to do this case, people, the overwhelming number of messages we got on Twitter, direct messages, emails was, oh, this will be fun. It seems mysterious, but clearly it's an avalanche. People even told us, why waste your time? It's an avalanche. It's been solved repeatedly. It's an avalanche. People just try to make hay of it because it happened, in the mountains during Soviet Union rule. And you know what? At first, when I went into this, of course, you're on the side of the mountain. It's snowy. That's probably what happened. But we've just walked you painstakingly through all of the facts and weird factors in this case. So, Brett, can you apply, and at the end of the day, whether there is a likelihood of something happening, you have to apply the facts to that case. So we have experts that get on the stand all the time and tell us about their expertise on whatever you have, on bullets, on blood splatter, on the way drugs interact with each other. But at the end of the day, what you have to do, you can't just leave it at that. You have to apply the facts of your case to what happens in theory or what happens in science or in statistics. So what do you think, Brett? When you apply what we've talked through painstakingly, the facts of this case, do you think the evidence points to an avalanche?
No, I don't. And that is the reason we started this case with the avalanche theory. We wanted you guys to know what the theory was so that as we walked through some of the unusual aspects of this case, you could decide for yourself whether or not those facts fit with the avalanche theory. And let's walk through some of the problems that this theory has. First, this was not an area that suffered from avalanches. The Ural Mountains, this area of the Ural Mountains, it was not an area where people expected there to be avalanches. It was not where people experienced avalanches, and everyone who was involved in the search knew that. The people who were involved in the search did not believe an avalanche was responsible for this. Moreover, even if an avalanche had occurred, this was an experienced group of hikers. They knew the terrain, they knew the dangers. They had a combined 55 years of outdoor experience between them. It's unlikely that this was the first time the hikers had dug down into the snow to secure their tent. And even if there were a snowslide or an avalanche as a result of that, it's unlikely that these experienced hikers wouldn't expect that as a possibility, and even more unlikely that they would panic as a result. Some of the hikers or some of the searchers who were involved in this even talked about this.
And Brett, as someone who is not, I haven't ever been on a Category 3 hike or any really difficult hike. To me, when I hear avalanche, I think that's it. That it's overwhelming, force of nature that you can't possibly outrun. If there's an avalanche, you just die. But it sounds like there are actually things that you could do in order to survive an avalanche. Do you know much about that?
Well, one of the things you would do to survive an avalanche is you would move parallel to the mountain. What you would not do, and what no experienced hiker would do, is move straight down the mountain to avoid the avalanche, because the avalanche is essentially coming behind you. So the fact that these hikers moved down the mountain in the way they did, slowly, deliberately, in a straight line, also seems to indicate that this was not an avalanche situation.
I guess that makes sense. Kind of like how you swim like parallel to the shoreline when you are caught in a riptide, as opposed to swimming towards the land, kind of like that.
Exactly. And an experienced swimmer knows that, whereas an unexperienced person doesn't. And that's another one of the reasons that we wanted to make sure everyone understood the qualifications and experience of these people. These were not, I mean, if I was out there and an avalanche came, I would just die because I wouldn't know what to do. I'd probably do the worst thing. There's no way I could handle that. These guys could. And other people who were involved in the search talked about how they had experienced avalanches. And they had snow come down on their tents in the middle of the night. And under no circumstances would the reaction be to cut your way out of your tent and flee without any of the things you would need to survive in the wilderness. Now, we have the journal Nature, and we have the article that was done there. Let's talk about that. One of the things people always say is that an avalanche was impossible in this area of the Ural Mountains, that the slope was simply not high enough, sharp enough for an avalanche to occur here. And everybody, essentially, who's ever been to where that tent was found says this is true. They say the slope just wasn't great enough. The journal Nature begins with the assumption that that is not true, that in fact the slope was greater than most people think. This in itself is sort of controversial, and I'm just not sure if it's true, and I don't know what to believe when it comes to this. If you read Death of Nine, which is one of the books I suggested, the person who wrote that book agrees with this, actually, even though they wrote it before the journal Nature came out. They say that this was a slope of at least 30 degrees, and that that's a slope where an avalanche could occur. Every other book you read on this, whether it's 1079, or Don't Go There, or Return to Dyatlov Pass, or I think it's Journey to Dyatlov Pass, actually, or Donnie Eicher's book, Dead Mountain, all of them say, been there, seen where the tent was, this is an incredibly gentle slope, there's no way there could have been an avalanche here. Let's just give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's assume that what the journal Nature did was prove, once and for all, that an avalanche was possible. I think we can give them that. They got a lot of fancy math I don't understand. They watched Frozen, which is a great movie, put those two things together, and came up with this new avalanche theory. I'm willing to give them that. I'm willing to give them that it's possible an avalanche happened on the Ural Mountains. But this is kind of like if you had somebody do a detailed scientific analysis of whether or not a person could have been shot and killed. And you got all the math right, and you write out a long article about the wind speed and the slope and bullet speed and everything else. But at the end of the day, the person doesn't have a bullet hole in them, and there's no blood. Well, all you did was say something's possible, but it doesn't fit the evidence on the scene. And I think that's what we have here. So let's walk through some of that. We know that at least one of the hikers was outside when this happened. We know that because there's evidence they were outside relieving themselves at the time. We also know that Zolotarov was essentially fully dressed when this happened, and moreover, had his camera around his neck. They would have known one of two things: either that no avalanche was coming, they would have been out there, they would have seen that, or if they had seen an avalanche coming, they would know that it was not a very serious avalanche. Remember, the journal Nature, the whole basis of this is that this is a minor snowslide. It's like the perfect storm snowslide, just enough to scare them out of the tent, not enough to leave any evidence that an avalanche happened. Well, if there's someone outside, it's not everybody's sleeping and shocked, and in the middle of the night, all the snow shows up on top of them and they have to react. That wasn't happening. Zolotarov at least was awake, outside, dressed, with his camera around his neck when this happened. Also, Zolotarov has some of the worst wounds of anyone. Zolotarov didn't get those in this avalanche. Even if an avalanche happened, once again, he's outside. The journal Nature article posits that everyone was laying down on this bed of skis, and that's what led to sort of some of the injuries we have. That didn't happen. Moreover, it seems that this avalanche would have had to have occurred earlier in the evening than what the journal Nature says is possible. That theory posits that essentially they dig into the snow, they set up their tent, and then these winds, these really powerful winds that we're going to talk about more later, it wasn't snowing that night, and you needed snow accumulation above the tent. Well, the theory is that these winds were responsible for that accumulation. They were blowing this snow upslope, building up this snow slab that would then generate this avalanche. According to the Journal of Nature, that's going to take 8 to 12 hours. So 8 to 12 hours after the group pitched their tent, that's when we would expect this avalanche. But that's a problem. Everyone who was involved in the search, everyone who found this tent said what seemed as though was happening is the group had just sat down to dinner, and that's when whatever happened, happened. And that's confirmed by a few things. Number one, the stove, which they used for heat, was not assembled yet. Now, people have speculated that they were just so tired, they didn't even bother to put it together. But they had put wood in the stove. The stove was found full of unburnt wood, indicating that they were actually in the process of putting the stove together and getting it ready for the night when it occurred. Moreover, reports of the contents of the tent indicate that the group was getting ready to eat when whatever happened, happened. We talked about this cocoa, which sounds like an urban legend, but actually in 1079, they have the report from the gentleman who found the cocoa, and he talks about how he found this like carafe of cocoa, and he knew that they'd put it together because it was frozen solid. So essentially what happened is, you can imagine, they're making the cocoa and they've got it all mixed up. Then they have to leave in a hurry. They leave this carafe of cocoa sitting there. It doesn't get knocked over, but what it does is it freezes over time, and that's how it was found. Moreover, the differing states of dress of the individuals in the tent indicate that some people were further along in getting ready to go to bed than others. You got to think that if, they're waiting for Zolotarov to put all his clothes on, that Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonashenko also would have put their clothes on. You got to imagine that they all would have put their shoes on. What seems as though happened was some people were better dressed because they had not taken off as many clothes yet when whatever happened, happened, which also seems to indicate that this theory from the Journal of Nature is just not correct.
In the Journal of Nature, and I read it a little while ago, so I can't remember, I know it's saying it's possible that this very minor snowslide occurs. Do they even begin to talk about whether that minor snowslide could have accounted for the, catastrophic injuries to several members of the group?
It's interesting. In the Journal of Nature, to my recollection, they don't talk about that as much. I think because even they recognize it's not possible. It cuts against their theory. In the National Geographic article, which was written about the Journal of Nature, they do talk about this. And they present it as this sort of, they didn't leave their friends behind, even though they were severely injured by this avalanche. They helped them get out of the tent, and they took them down the mountain, and it's a story of fighting for your friends and all this great stuff. And it all sounds wonderful. That's all wonderful, but also impossible. If you believe an avalanche happened, one thing I guarantee you did not happen is the injuries on Thibault, Luda, and Zolotarov were not caused by that avalanche. We know from the evidence that walking down that mountain, nobody was carrying Zolotarov. Nobody was carrying Luda. There are 8 to 9 sets of footprints heading down that mountain in a straight line in a walking pace. The injuries that they had would have killed them in 10 to 15 minutes. Luda has a rib through her heart. She is not walking down that mountain after she has that damage. And remember, this is not a rush down to the cedar tree. This is over 1 kilometer they're walking. This is taking them 45 minutes to an hour to get down there. Whatever happened, even if it was an avalanche, they didn't get those injuries through that process. So even if you believe the avalanche, it doesn't answer all your questions. Moreover, in that walk down the hill, when they're all walking down the hill without the appropriate clothes, at some point they would have realized there's no avalanche. Or they would realize the avalanche has stopped. It's a minor avalanche. Let's go back to the tent and get our stuff. That doesn't happen. You have to think that it's 40 degrees below zero. It's not going to take them long to realize at any time to realize that however dangerous the avalanche is, the cold is just as dangerous. And you have to imagine that if they're facing this sort of small avalanche, it's a problem. Maybe it means they can't stay in their tent. Maybe it means they even have to go away from their tent. That once they realize it's not an ongoing danger, that they would have gone back there to get some supplies, to get some shoes, for goodness sake. But they don't do that.
Right, especially if it's this kind of minor snow slide. It would not have lasted. I mean, avalanches would have happened quickly in the sense that it would have been over within minutes. And here they are walking for 45 minutes to an hour in temperatures that are not survivable in their current state.
And you mentioned the injuries. I mean, let's just talk about this. If there were an avalanche and it didn't cause the injuries to Zolotarov, Luda, and Thibault, what did? The common answer, and I think the answer that the folks from the avalanche theory, and actually many theories, so Donnie Eichert's theory, which we're going to talk about later, is that he explains why they left the tent, and then he says that the way the injuries happened was these three they're going off, they're going to build some sort of shelter, and then this sort of like cruel fate strikes. They're walking over this ravine where there's a river or a little stream running. It's melted out the snow and refrozen. It's caused an ice dome. The ice dome collapses underneath them. They fall down into the ravine, and then presumably a bunch of snow falls on top of them. A couple things. Modern experts have said that the injury suffered by the three of them would require a fall of around 60 feet and would be accompanied by other injuries that they don't have, such as broken legs, broken arms, a broken pelvis, damage to their internal organs. The ravine where they fell in was 9 to 15 feet deep. So you have to believe, if you believe this avalanche theory, that three incredibly unlikely things happened. Number one, an avalanche nobody's ever seen before, and nobody's ever seen since, happened, drove them out of their tent. They went all the way down to this ravine. They walked across this ice thing. They fell into the ravine, and then they had the second unlikely snow event where a bunch of snow falls on top of them and injures them. Assume for a second that's what you think happened. You think all those things came together. Here's the problem. Alexander. Alexander is the problem, because Alexander is in that ravine with these three, and he does not have any of the injuries they have. Why not? If he fell through the ice with them, if the snow fell on top of them, he was with them, why doesn't he have any of those injuries? Moreover, why don't any of them have the injuries that are typical of people who are found under snow in such situations? Asphyxia. We don't see that. You're being covered up with snow. We should see evidence of asphyxia. We should see hemorrhaging around the eyes. That's one of the things that you see in these types of situations. You should see snow accumulation around the mouth and nose where they're attempting to breathe. We don't see that. And what in the world's going on with Zolotarov? So Zolotarov falls through this ice dome. He gets crushed by a bunch of ice and snow. He's got all these broken ribs. He's 10 minutes away from dying. And then he just casually gets a pencil and piece of paper out somehow underneath all this snow and dies with those in his hand. That doesn't make any sense to me, personally.
No, that makes absolutely no sense to have the wherewithal to be able to do that.
And let's just talk about the biggest problem with all this, right? You got this Journal of Nature article, which is purporting to show that this is possible, and I'm willing to accept that it does show that it's possible. But at the end of the day, there's absolutely no evidence that an avalanche happened. If you look at one of the last photos taken by the group, and we've put this on in both our YouTube videos and on our website, you can clearly see a ski pole stuck in the snow. Look for it. I want you to look at the same picture of a group of rescuers finding the tent. That ski pole is sitting there unmoved right next to the tent. The snow on the tent is much more easily accounted for by wind-blown accumulation than it is any kind of avalanche. You would expect to have a lot more snow on top of the tent. The explanation from the journal Nature is actually that the wind blew the snow of the avalanche away, which just goes to tell you how small of an avalanche this would have been. Moreover, as we've said before, there's nothing inside the tent that indicates there was an avalanche. Nothing is disturbed. Cups of cocoa are unturned over. Crackers are unbroken. There's a flashlight sitting on top of the tent, turned off, which worked, by the way, when searchers switched it on. What does that mean? For one thing, if the group was fleeing in terror from a supposed avalanche so quickly they couldn't even put their clothes on, why'd they take the time to leave a flashlight on top of the tent? Moreover, everyone who saw the tent said it had not moved a single inch from where the group had set it up. And recall, this is a tent that's meant to be pitched in the forest. That's the way you're supposed to do it. They were essentially using skis and ski poles to set up this tent. It was a very sort of ad hoc way to do so. If an avalanche had hit that tent, it was moving. It wasn't just going to sit there, not moving. There's no way that would happen.
So what you're saying is the way that the tent was pitched was not its structurally most sound, and yet it was still standing, weeks after they had pitched the tent.
Right, and moreover, they'd even pitched the tent, sort of broadside to the mountain, as we talked about earlier. So you got to imagine this avalanche would have hit it with its full force. Even a small avalanche, which this is posited to be, it just doesn't make any sense. It does not fit the evidence on the ground. There's a reason that no one involved in the investigation at the time said this was an avalanche. And you got to believe, if the Soviet Union could have said this was an avalanche, they would have said so. Remember, the families of the people who were involved in this, Luda, Zolotarov, Thibault, all those injuries they had, they didn't learn about those until the 90s. The Soviet Union didn't tell them about those till the 90s. They were like, everybody died of hypothermia. The Soviet Union wanted to make this as simple and straightforward as possible. If they could have said with a straight face, this is an avalanche, they would have said it. But they couldn't, because even they recognized that an avalanche just doesn't make sense.
And back to what we were talking about at the beginning of this episode, Brett, that Nature article. So for those of you who may not know the publication Nature, it is a well-regarded scientific, I think peer-reviewed journal. And we're not saying that the article mathematically doesn't add up. I don't know. I haven't run the calculations myself. But what that article is trying to answer is not whether an avalanche occurred in this case. Even if they reach that conclusion, that's not actually what the article is saying. That article is simply saying the common refrain that the slope of this mountain could not possibly be one in which an avalanche could take place is not mathematically true. And that's fine, because they can type numbers away all day, run regressions all they want all day, but at the end of the day, even if an avalanche were possible, it did not happen here. It does not make sense when you look at the injuries of these 9 people, of the way they died, of what they left behind, of these undisturbed crackers and full glasses of cocoa, a flashlight delicately placed on top of a tent. If I'm seeing an avalanche come at me and I'm fleeing in terror, that flashlight is going to drop to the ground, or I'm going to hang on to it for dear life in hopes of it somehow lighting my path to safety, but it's not going to be gently placed on top of the tent. Really, what I think of when I think of that flashlight is, we know that someone went outside to relieve themselves when apparently this occurred at some time. I think of someone going outside to relieve themselves, probably with a flashlight, and when they're going to unbutton their pants, putting that flashlight on the tent in, planning to get it after they finish going to the restroom and have pulled up their pants, and needing probably both hands to do so. And whatever happened, they didn't grab that flashlight. Maybe whatever occurred next happened too quickly. That's what I think that flashlight means, not somehow that it indicates there was an avalanche.
If this were a case where there were evidence that an avalanche happened, but the refrain had always been, too bad, it's impossible. there couldn't have been an avalanche there. So all this evidence you point to of an avalanche has to have some other explanation, because an avalanche isn't possible. If that were the story, we would be pointing at that Journal of Nature article and saying, this is the solution. We've been missing it all along. In fact, the thing that all the evidence was there telling us it's an avalanche, it was an avalanche. And this is the explanation of how it happened. And that would be your Occam's razor case. We don't have that here. We don't have anything telling this is an avalanche, other than the fact these people left a perfectly good tent in the middle of the night and all ended up dead. And there had to be a reason they left their tent. And, well, it could have been an avalanche, is one of the things people say. And the Journal of Nature says, yeah, it could have been an avalanche. Here's the math. Okay, fine. I don't deny that. But I do deny that there's any evidence that supports the idea that what actually happened that night was an avalanche.
So now that we've talked about the theory that we started with, and, you know, I think we're both on the same page, Brett, that I don't think there's any evidence of an avalanche here. Let's talk about some other theories. Infrasound. Now, this is a theory first proposed by Donnie Eicher in Dead Mountain. Eicher theorizes that winds rushing over and down the mountain, striking a rocky outcropping called Boot Rock, created the perfect storm of infrasound. These Kármán vortices would have sounded like a freight train coming down the mountain, and the effect of the infrasound on their minds would have essentially driven them into a deep terror that they would not understand. And Eicher theorizes that terror would only disperse once the group had reached the tree line, but by then it was too late. They were without clothes, in beyond freezing weather, and they would not be able to survive the elements without any provisions. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with infrasound as a weapon, this is something that we've seen as recently as in Cuba. Brett, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think the Havana syndrome is what they called it. For a long time, people have experimented with infrasound. The idea being that if you use this, it's a sound you can't hear, but it sort of messes with your mind and causes all sorts of physical and psychological problems. And you guys may recall that I think about 3 or 4 years ago, there was an incident at the Cuban consulate in Havana where this was apparently, and I think it's still under investigation, not entirely understood, but may have been used against American diplomats to sort of drive them crazy. And I think a lot of militaries have looked at this for a long time. Look, Dead Mountain's a great book. I think everybody should read it. It's really well written. It's very detailed. Donnie Eicher, he manages to interview Yuri Yudin before he died, which was, a great thing. And it's nice to have that resource. Hard for me to believe this is what happened. A lot of problems with this. Number one, it doesn't explain a lot of the things that the avalanche theory doesn't explain the injuries. Eicher sort of just accepts this collapse into the ravine theory because he has to, because his theory really only explains why they would leave the tent. But you have to believe that this affected the entire group, all 9 of them, in the same way. And not just in the typical way that infrasound might affect someone where it makes them feel sick or it makes them feel dizzy, or maybe it does cause fear in them, but it really just drove them insane. Problem is, they don't really act like they're insane. Yes, they cut the tent. You could say that's a crazy thing to do, but then after they get out of the tent, they walk in a straight line, orderly, down the mountain. And this is a problem I have with a lot of these theories. If we're going to talk about yetis in a second, for instance, if you're being attacked by a yeti, or you're under the influence of infrasound, or there's a wolverine in your tent, why are you keeping your mind enough to walk down the hill in this orderly manner? You would think the infrasound you would essentially have people running around like crazy people, right? That's the whole idea, is they've been driven crazy. And I don't think this theory can overcome the fact that once they got out of that tent, they didn't actually act like crazy people.
And the other thing is, they were experienced hikers. We've already talked about this. Dyatlov did a lot of his research when he was planning out this Category 3 hike before he submitted it to the university for approval. He would have studied this. This would not have been the first time that the infrasound issue would have come up, because they're not the first people to have hiked this mountain. And remember, right before they were to set off on their hike, they had spoken to a local, Rempel. Remember, that was the one word that we saw in the diary that seemed very ominous. But Rempel, because he's a local, he would have known others talk about this infrasound. He probably would have warned them about it. I just don't see how the infrasound phenomenon, this vortex of sound, could have occurred for the very first time here. Now, obviously, with sonar, with infrasound, it's possible that they were just in the exact zone, that someone has never stayed long enough to be driven crazy by the sounds before. But I find it unlikely, because there are the Mansi who live in this area. There are the locals like Rempel who know this area, and even if they themselves haven't walked on this direct path, they talk to just about everyone who comes through this area. They would have heard legends. They would have heard others with this experience. And others may have fallen to the same fate. And we've not heard anything about infrasound. So while it may sound like a sexy theory, it seems hard to believe that Dyatlov and the group would have never heard about it.
And even more convincing to me is that nobody since has experienced this. I mean, you have people who go up there all the time to try and recreate this, who go up there, who stay in the exact same area at the exact same time, experience a lot of really difficult things. None of them have experienced this infrasound. Iker tries to say, well, yeah, but, the math is right and the boot's perfect and all this other stuff. But there's no indication that.
So another theory then is something called paradoxical undressing. And what this means is there's a strange phenomenon when people are experiencing hypothermia, that even though their bodies are extremely cold and they're about to die from the cold, their bodies tell them that they are very hot, and they start undressing because they think they're hot. And that might explain some of the various stages of undressing of these people, that maybe they didn't leave the tent in the stages of dress, but that ultimately they took off their clothes because they thought they were burning up. Now, I think there's just no evidence of this, and it's really a lazy man's theory to explain why the hikers are found essentially in no clothes and not wearing shoes. For one thing, these are experienced hikers. They would be aware of paradoxical undressing, and they would know that even if their bodies are telling them they're hot, they know -40 degrees means do not take off your coats, do not take off your clothes. You are not actually cold. If you take these off, you will not survive the elements. They know this. Their brains know this, even if their bodies are telling them something different. And the other thing is, they were without shoes. Now, even if they felt like they were burning up, they would know enough that they needed to keep their shoes on to protect their feet from the ice and the snow, to be able to walk so that their toes didn't freeze off. So they would be able to retain the use of their feet. That does not explain them taking off their shoes.
This is really a lazy man's theory. I remember I actually learned about this case from an old website. I guess not old, still going, crack.com. Which is it's kind of a comedy website, but it has these really good articles that are like 5 things you never knew about such and such or whatever. And one of the articles was 5 mysteries that have actually been solved, and the Dyatlov Pass was one of them. I'd never heard of the Dyatlov Pass until I read this article, and it was like, oh, it was really just paradoxical undressing. That's what happened. That's stupid. Number one, most of them weren't undressed. Most of them had a lot of clothes on. They just didn't have enough clothes on. The only 2 who were undressed were Yuri Krivonashenko and Yuri Doroshenko, and both of them were undressed by their friends after they died to try and keep warm themselves. So it's sort of the opposite of paradoxical undressing is dressing. It's a stupid, silly theory, and yet it continues to come up literally today. I was like cruising through Yahoo News or something, and there was an article about the Dyatlov Pass and paradoxical undressing. And I just thought, oh my goodness, this is absurd. There's only one person in the group who might have suffered from this, and that's Alexander. We keep coming back to Alexander because there's so many weird things about him. You may recall he's in that ravine with everybody, rib crushed like the rest of them, but he did die apparently of hypothermia, and his jacket was unzipped and his vest was unbuttoned, which is really strange if you're in cold weather. Why would he do that? And one possibility is that he may have actually been suffering from paradoxical undressing to some extent and may have unzipped his jacket because of that.
And, while we're dispensing with some theories that I think we can quickly move through, let's talk about a theory that the hikers found some shrooms, and specifically fly agaric. They got high off of these shrooms, and in their state of being high, they got themselves killed. Brett, I just don't think this is likely, because given that they were taking this hike so seriously that they had a pact with each other not to smoke, that it seems unlikely they would then turn to do shrooms, knowing that this could affect them, especially at these altitudes, to do something that could get themselves killed. And they weren't acting as if they were high. It seems like they were acting actually very orderly, and they knew what to do to try and survive when they found themselves in those situations. They tried to build a fire. They tried to dig out shelter in order to survive. They took clothes from their deceased colleagues to try and better their own chances of survival in this weather. Those are all very rational steps to take after the fact of whatever made them leave their tent.
Yeah, and I think so many of these theories are based on the misunderstanding that the hikers cut their way out of the tent and then went crazy and did crazy things and were running, willy-nilly down the mountain or whatever. And that's just not true. I mean, it's just not true. That's not what they did. There's no indication they were acting any kind of crazy way or doing crazy things. The only potentially crazy, quote unquote, crazy thing they did was cut out their way from the tent. But after that, like you said, I mean, they basically acted rather reasonably and rationally, all things considered, other than not, grabbing some clothes to go with them. So, yeah, if they were high on shrooms, it's hard for me to imagine them marching in an orderly fashion at a walking pace down the mountain. Okay, so now that we've talked about all the things it's not, let's solve this mystery once and for all with what I think is clearly the correct theory: radioactive yetis. Yes, yetis. And not only yetis, but radioactive yetis, which explain everything that happened.
Wait, real quick. Yetis
here.
themselves are not radioactive, right?
Well, you think that, but apparently they are. Apparently radioactive yetis are a thing, and yetis, for reasons that are unclear, just give off radiation. I mean, everybody knows that, Alice. Come on. You can learn that in your biology class or whatever, your zoology class. Anyway, yeah. So no lesser a purveyor of media than the Discovery Channel, which there was a time when you actually got information from the Discovery Channel, presented a documentary called Russian Yetis: The Killer Lives. And the whole theory behind this documentary was that the Dyatlov group, encountered a Yeti, and that Yeti attacked their tent, at which point they fled in terror. The Yeti chased them down, murdered 3 of them, thus accounting for their severe wounds, and then the rest perished in the night, trying their best to stay away from the Yeti's crushing grasp. In that documentary, they present a picture which they claim is a photo taken by the group of a Yeti. We will post this photo online. You can take a look at it yourself and tell us whether you think it's a Yeti. Doesn't look like a Yeti to me. Looks like a person to me. But hey, we did the owl theory. The difference between the owl theory and the Yeti theory is the owl theory actually has evidence to back it up. The Yeti theory is a humorous but unlikely theory. I would love, if you guys have anything to back up the Yeti theory, I would love to hear it.
We talked a lot about how they were fun-loving. They were a fun-loving group. We really saw that on their long trip over. I have no idea what this photo is of, but it doesn't necessarily look like the person was trying to take a picture of the landscape and someone just stepped out. To me, it looks like they were probably playing a prank or joking around with each other, and one of them stepped out, and either he was using the restroom and they were messing with him and taking a picture. But remember, they were a fun-loving group. They were laughing, they were singing, they got arrested on the way up there. I don't think it's beyond them to be playing tricks with each other, taking pictures of each other, trying to catch each other, and, playing kind of a game of hide and seek or whatnot. If in fact it were a yeti, you would think there'd be some discussion of it, or if there was some sort of animal or some sort of thing in the night that was causing them concern, you would think that this would appear somewhere in their diaries, but that is not the case. All we have is this one photo, which to me actually probably fits more into their character of being young people who are friends with each other, having a good time, and maybe this is one of their pranks.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because there's another prank that they did, which has supported this for a long time, and that's they actually created, the night of February 1st, the night they disappeared, a fake newspaper, the Evening Otorten. Otorten is the name of the mountain that they were attempting to reach. They had camped on Kholat Cycle. They're trying to get to Otorten. The space in between them is the Dyatlov Pass, and they had created this little fake newspaper. And they had all these humorous excerpts, and one of them was science. And the science excerpt said, "In recent years, there has been a heated debate about the existence of Yeti. According to recent reports, Yeti lives in the northern Ural near Mount Otorten." So this is another thing that people point to, that they are actually saying, hey, we saw a Yeti. Now, some other examples of things they introduced, there's a question under Armenian quiz: can 9 hikers get by with 1 stove and a blanket? This is obviously something humorous that they're doing. Philosophical seminar on the topic of love and hiking takes place daily on the tent premises. Lectures are given by Dr. Thibault and postdoctorate of love science, Dubinina. So pretty clearly, they're just making jokes here. Sadly, the night that they die, there's not actually a Yeti. They're not actually talking about a Yeti.
Man, now I think that's a cold water prosecutor move. Everyone is so excited about the radioactive Yeti. You barely built it up. I don't even know what a radioactive Yeti is.
I know. I'm sorry.
It would have been great.
I wish we could say it was a radioactive
Yeti. It would be great. But okay, you know what? We're not even touching the brim of the possible theories out there, because this is a historical mystery. People have just thrown theory after theory. So let's talk about another one: escaped prisoners. Now, there were many gulags and work camps in the area, and in fact, there were escaped prisoners who were later apprehended during the massive search of the area. And so the idea is that escaped prisoners somehow attacked them and did this to the hikers. But there's just no indication that these escapees had anything to do with the hikers. I mean, it's not even clear that they'd be able to overpower this hardy group anyways. Remember, they would have just escaped with quite literally the clothes on their back and nothing more. More importantly, the tent that the hikers left wasn't ransacked. Their money wasn't taken. The food wasn't eaten. You would think that escapees who had just run away from these work camps would be hungry. They would drink the hot cocoa. They'd eat the crackers. They'd take the money so that they could somehow, get across a border and have money to start a new life.
They'd even drink the vodka.
They'd drink the vodka. But none of that had happened. And maybe you think, well, maybe they did this for other reasons, not for money or for food, but to sexually assault the women who were on the trip. But the girls were not sexually assaulted. Their autopsies, while lacking in many places, actually went into great detail that these 2 women were still virgins and were not sexually active at the time of their death. Which, Brett, that's... To say in an autopsy that there was no sexual assault is I think, well within the realm of a typical autopsy. But to go into such detail about their lack of sexual activity and the fact that they were virgins is actually unusual.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what was going on with this autopsy. I don't know if that was just standard procedure in the Soviet Union at the time. But if you read it, it is, I don't know, it was surprising to me at least. The detail with which the autopsy discusses this. It's possible this was sort of a bone to the families, going to really just hammer away at the fact that, these girls died with their honor intact or whatever you want to say. That's a possibility.
And, if that were the case, Brett, and I think that could very much well be the case, that the families had already endured so much tragedy, and this is kind of a small way to give something back to the families. I think actually it may show how powerful these families are. Remember, we noted that these were intelligent, kind of top of their fields individuals on these trips, and that if they had lived, they would have probably been leaders in the Soviet Union. They also, many of them came from well-to-do families with influence within the Soviet Union. And I can imagine that the families of the two women on the trip had power and were able to pressure and to say, make sure, our daughters were honorable, and we want everyone to know that. We want no sort of rumor to say anything about the fact that our daughters were on this trip with 8 men, and for anyone to question their honor. And if that is the case, I think that is more a commentary on how powerful these families are, which may actually feed into some other theories.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense and could very well be the case. So one other theory we'll talk about today, and then we'll go ahead and wrap it up, and we'll be back with you tomorrow and finish this up. And I think the best theories are still to come. Zolotarov did it. That's another theory that people have. If you go to dyatlovpass.com, there's actually someone who's done sort of a fictionalization of how Zolotarov could have been responsible for this. Remember, Zolotarov, he's much older than the rest of the group. He's a person who's experienced war. He clearly, you would think, would want to be the leader of this group. And you can imagine him sort of chafing at the leadership of Dyatlov, particularly if he disagreed with him. And there are some people who wonder if Zolotarov, chafing at the leadership of Dyatlov and maybe suffering from some post-traumatic stress disorder from the war and everything he endured, might have attacked the group and dealt some of the damage that we see. Obviously, eventually he would have been dealt with himself because he suffered some catastrophic damage as well. But maybe by that point, it was too late. A fight among the group is actually a popular theory. There are different variations on it. One variation is that Dyatlov, realizing that he never should have camped on the side of that mountain, was on edge all night and thought an avalanche was coming and frightened the group and got them all to leave. And they get down there to that cedar tree and they realize there is no avalanche. And some of the group members are like, you've murdered us, essentially. And they get in a fight with him, and they have to, the rest of the group has to break them up. And that would explain some of the injuries that we see on their hands and the injuries that seem to indicate a fight. Maybe something like that happened. It's certainly a viable theory to some extent, but I don't think there is any actual evidence to say that Zolotarov is responsible for this. It's certainly true he was the best dressed of anybody, but remember, he ends up with all of them. He ends up in a ravine with 3 other people. Hard to imagine that would have happened if he had gone crazy and tried to kill them all.
Yeah, the way they work together, though, even if there was a fight, they recognize that nature is greater than any sort of tiffs they may be having. And they were smart enough not to put themselves in danger for a fight that could have ended all their lives.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it just, if Zolotarov had been this crazy person trying to kill them all, you'd have found Zolotarov's body somewhere else. They would have defeated him and his body would be off somewhere. He wouldn't be in that ravine with everybody else, with a pencil and piece of paper in his hand. And why does he have a camera around his neck? Is he going to take pictures of this after it's over? So Zolotarov is an interesting character. There are certainly theories that involve Zolotarov, some of which we're going to talk about next time. But I think the theory that he sort of went crazy and murdered everybody is not one that has any support. Okay, so we've had a lot of fun tonight. We really hammered on the avalanche theory. If you think we've got it wrong and you think there actually is evidence, I hope you will reach out to us and let us know. Email us at prosecutorspod@gmail.com. You find our website, prosecutorspodcast.com. We are all over social media at prosecutorspod. We also, as you mentioned earlier, have our Patreon page where you can join the discussion.
Can we just do a quick shout out to our friends who have started a fan page? You guys are awesome. Oh my goodness. I cannot believe y'all did that.
I know. I was really kind of, I don't know. It hit me right here in my heart when I saw that people were doing that. So thank you guys. You guys are also supportive. It just, there's a reason we continue to do this, and it's because you guys are so supportive of what we do, and it makes us want to keep doing it for as long as we can. So as long as you guys support us, we're going to keep recording episodes. So thank you so much for all that. So yeah, I think that's all we've got tonight. Keep leaving those 5-star reviews. Keep telling your friends. Keep tweeting about it, talking about it on Reddit and Facebook and everywhere else. We've been just amazed by the outpouring of support and the growth of this podcast. As we are recording this, it's been about a year, almost to the day, since we recorded our very first episode. So it's hard to believe that we've been doing this for a year, but it has been awesome, and I hope we can do it for a long time.
Indeed, Brett. Happy almost 1 year anniversary.
I know. We got another couple months to go before we released an episode, but we recorded our first episode.
A lot of work went into this before.
Yeah, we recorded our first episode, and then the pandemic hit almost immediately. So as we record this today, we are basically almost to the 1 year anniversary of the beginning, at least in the United States, of the pandemic. So hard to believe, but. And thank you again to Daily Harvest and BetterHelp for sponsoring this show. We are so proud to be affiliated with those wonderful products, and we hope you guys will support them. All right, guys. Well, that's all we've got for today. We won't keep you any longer, but we will be back tomorrow with more theories, and we will wrap this case up, I promise. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors.
Except you said that you don't know what to say to me in person. That's terrible.
Well, I don't. I can only talk to you when we're doing the podcast. That's the only time I can talk to you. Otherwise, it's awkward and weird. So
why is it awkward?
This has to be our friendship. I mean, I guess if I carried around my headphones, maybe just wore them while I was talking to you, it'd make me feel better.
Yeah, that'd be not weird.
Like now in the office, when I see you, I'm just like, I don't know what to say.
No, you're not.
I totally am.
No, you're not.
Totally am.
If that's true, we should end the podcast so that for the sake of our friendship.
We can't end the podcast. Then I would never be able to talk to you.
What? Your reasoning is faulty.
I don't know what to say.
Okay.
Here we go. Dwaddled long enough.
Is it dwaddled or doddled?
I don't know. Who can say?
I'm sorry. This is going to be a great episode. It's probably good that we had a mess up episode because it's not going to be any better today.
Find yourself looking for a new job or change in career? Monster.com is here to help. We are not only here to bring you job postings, but also AI interview prep and salary tools, expert career advice, and top-notch resume services. We've got everything you need to land your perfect job fit. Discover the magic of finding the ideal job with Monster.com. Your future starts now. Visit Monster.com today. Your next job opportunity is just a click away.
If you're looking to streamline your audio advertising buys and maximize your revenue, look no further than Triton Digital's programmatic audio advertising exchange, A2X. The private exchange consists of only licensed broadcasters and top-tier internet radio publishers, assuring the quality inventory and brand safety you can trust. Visit www.tritondigital.com to learn more.